Alex, just on that, what does it mean to be given the captaincy for your first time?
Yeah, obviously with Romy and Appy out, two tremendous captains, they have been all year, and I think for me, just making sure that I do my role to the best of my ability and lead from the front for the boys, and yeah, I think that's all I've got to do, worry about my actions on the field, and yeah.
Just stepping in this week, I guess, what would you like to bring to the role?
I think not too much will change for myself, you know. We've got a lot of young boys in our team, you know, making sure I just get around them throughout the week, and we've got a good leadership group here, you know. I think, you know, there's a few of the boys out there on the weekend that I'm sure will play a role in getting us the victory on the weekend, and yeah, really looking forward to it.
It's probably a little bit of a tough time to step into this role given where the last sort of like 6 games have been at. I guess what's the messaging this week, because I see that, you know, there's an entire new spine that you're playing with.
Yeah, look, energy's been, you know, extremely high this week. I think, you know, we've ads coming into the halves, and we've got Latu, who's you know, a great young player, and I think you know the energy's been high all week. Sorry, he just rattled me. He's pulled me off.
You can start again.
What was the question? Sorry.
I guess it'll be an interesting week just because you've got so many changes to your spine.
Yeah, nah. Look, I think the energy's been very high. Like I said, we've got a lot of young boys in our team, and I think, you know, for us, it's just making sure 1 to 17, whoever goes out there, puts in a good performance.
We're just chatting to Twal earlier about, you know, Sonny moving from wing to fullback is quite a big shift for him. I guess what's sort of been the chat amongst the team about, like, do you let him play how he thinks he's meant to play, or has he been given directives?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, Sunni's a really good player, and I think, you know, wherever you put him, he's a footballer. I think, you know, he'll do a job for us. And at the back, if anything, he gets his hands on the ball a bit more, and you know, he's coming from the wing to the fullback. I think, you know, he's really excited about it, and I think, you know, with a lot of change comes excitement, and I think we're just sort of diving into that sort of part of it. And you know, I think, like I said before, the boys are very excited, and we just had our first training session for the week, and you know, it was a really good session. So yeah.
He seems pretty confident. Doesn't really let the pressure get to him, I'm guessing.
Nah, I think yeah, that's what he brings. You know, Sunni's a really confident kid, and I'm sure on the weekend, you know, he'll have a blinder of a performance, and you know, he'll be a big part in making sure we get the win.
We saw Adam doing last 2.5 for a bit last week, and obviously training this week there 5.5 back. How's that combination between the two of them?
Yeah, I think it's a really good balance. You know, obviously Ads has been around for a while now, and Latu's, you know, that young sort of, you know, exciting prospect, and I think, you know, they'll really bounce off each other. You know, they really bring different sort of things in terms of playing ability, but I think, you know, it's a really good mix, you know, for our team, and you know, I'm really confident, you know, playing off the back of them, and you know, I think it'll really work well on the weekend.
Going back to the captaincy, I know you've been around the NRL for a long time, but is this what, like, you know, did you ever dream that you'd ever be captain of an NRL team?
Nah, look, yeah, obviously when Benji gave me the call, you know, I was extremely grateful. You know, it's a really proud club, and you know, while we're not in the best position at the moment, you know, I feel extremely honoured, you know, to, you know, run the boys out this weekend, and you know, I spoke to the boys before. You know, I plan on going 1 from 1, and yeah, so yeah, I'm really excited for the opportunity, and really grateful as well that Benji put that trust in me.
Some big forwards in that Roosters forward pack. You're looking forward to that challenge?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. You know, they've been going pretty well, and I think for us, you know, we're at a point in our season where, you know, we're really looking for that 2 points. So I can't be more excited for the weekend, and you know, we've got a young, exciting team, as I mentioned before, and I know that they're excited for the weekend as well.
Alex, you mentioned that it's just sort of been a bit of a tough period and where you're at now. At the moment, does it still feel like finals is actually like a thing that you could actually make? Yeah,
of course. I think the competition is really tight, and you know, while we've had a sort of a tough run the last 4 to 6 weeks, we've actually been playing some really good footy. You know, by the weekend, we've been in the game, you know, pretty much for the whole 80 minutes. So I think for us, it's just, you know, going back to what works, and you know, like I said before, you know, I think finals is definitely on the table for us. You know, if we can string a win this weekend and start our run, you know, anything's possible.
Now, I know a lot's been made of Talon's move over to the Eels and what's actually sort of happening behind closed doors for him to potentially want to leave the club. I guess, is there, and I mean, this is the second big young talent that's now left the club in quite a short period. Is there a reason that these young boys don't want to stay here?
No, look, when you're young, you're looking for an opportunity and things like that. You know, there's various aspects you've got to consider. But in saying that, I'm not too sure on what the situation was with Talon. Obviously, I know we've got a world-class hooker at the club in Appy, and you know, I can't really comment too much on that because I don't actually know all the details. So yeah, I wish Talon all the best. He's a great young prospect, and I'm, you know, looking forward to coming up against him in the future.
Speaking about young players at the club, we saw Jared Hayward out there training with the team. What can we kind of expect from him? I know he's still quite young.
Yeah, he's trained with us a few times, and yeah, he's a really exciting young prospect. Obviously, you know, they've got the raps on him, you know, coming from Australian schoolboys and whatnot. And you know, first and foremost, he's a really respectful kid. And I think, you know, any kid that sort of building off a foundation of being a really good kid, I think, you know, they've got a long career ahead of him. And you know, I'm looking forward to, you know, taking him under my wing and, you know, sort of showing him what it takes to be an NRL player week in, week out. And you know, I'm sure that he's got all the talent in the world. So, you know, I think if a few of us older boys can get around him and, you know, sort of make that transition into becoming a full-time player, you know, easier, then I think, you know, we'll do our job.
Just back to Adam, I know you guys have been close for a long time.
Yeah.
He's off contract. Would you love to see him play alongside him beyond this season?
Of course, you know, I think the one thing, you know, about Az is that we're really close off the field, and you know, I'd love for him to stay at the club, and I'm sure, you know, when that time comes, he'll make that decision, and you know, and whatever decision he makes, I'll back him. So yeah.